Welcome to the Ayaan Hirsi podcast, a home for critical thinking and common sense. My guest today is Ian Rowe. Ian is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he focuses on education and upward mobility, family formation, and adoption. He is the co-founder of Vertex Partnership Academies, a new network of character-based International Baccalaureate high schools opening in the Bronx in 2022. He's also the chairman of the board of Spence-Chapin, a nonprofit adoption services organization, and the co-founder of the National Summer School Initiative. He concurrently serves as a senior visiting fellow at the Woodson Center and a writer for the 1776 Unites campaign. In his new book, Agency, Ian seeks to inspire young people of all races to build strong families and become masters of their own destiny. The book comes out this week, and I highly recommend that everyone pick up a copy. As the longest-running magazine in the world, The Spectator believes that journalism must be witty as well as insightful, that ideas should be freely discussed without the constant threat of cancellation. The Spectator never confuses the serious with the dull. It isn't right-wing or left-wing. It believes in challenging, informing, and entertaining readers. Since its founding in 1828, its mission has been to convey intelligence, not ideology. The Spectator believes that life is bigger than politics, which is why it also covers the arts and culture, food and wine, travel, and life in all its facets. Sign up today, and as one of my listeners, you'll receive 3 free months of both the print and digital magazine, plus a free Spectator hat. To redeem this special offer just for listeners of this podcast, go to spectatorworld.com/special offer and use offer code Ayaan, AYAAN, at checkout. Since I discovered it in 2009, I've loved The Spectator because it's dedicated to wit, strong reasoning, and brilliant writing. You're guaranteed to be entertained. The Spectator has published some of my favorite writers, including Douglas Murray, Charles Moore, Lionel Shriver, Christopher Caldwell, and the late Roger Scruton. From the Biden administration to book reviews, from cancel culture to cultural cuisine, The Spectator will entertain you from cover to cover. So sign up today to get 3 months of The Spectator for free, plus a free Spectator hat when you subscribe at spectatorworld.com/special offer. Again, use offer code Ayaan, AYAAN, at checkout to redeem your offer. That's spectatorworld.com/special offer and offer code Ayaan, AYAAN. Before we turn to my conversation, I want to tell you about Stackmail. Free email services like Gmail and Yahoo aren't really free. You pay with your privacy. In fact, internet giants like Big Tech bank on exploiting your data by selling it to the highest bidder. Your business plan? Google has it. Your personal records? Yahoo could sell them to drug companies. That's why you should trust Stackmail to secure your email. It'll make you feel safe again. I'm very concerned with security, not just physical security, but cybersecurity too. I know the importance of keeping your email secure, and Stackmail will do just that. Stackmail keeps email private, period. Every email is encrypted, even if the recipient doesn't use encryption. When you delete an email in Stackmail, it's gone forever. And Stackmail uses their own servers, not Amazon's, which means they can't be put out of business. Switching to Stackmail is seamless too. You can easily transfer all of your current email data, so there's no starting from scratch. Stackmail is also backed by the most stringent privacy laws in the world. You get unlimited anonymous aliases. This feature protects your main email address from spam and phishing attacks. So when you're giving your email to a company but want to protect your identity, Stackmail can generate a shareable alias email so people can't sell your information and they can be deleted anytime. I've looked into cybersecurity a lot, and now is the time to secure your emails. Stackmail is easy and gets the job done. Your privacy is valuable and should be protected. Your cybersecurity has never been more at risk. Email snoops and scammers are taking advantage of the pandemic as phishing has skyrocketed in the last year. Take control of your privacy with Stackmail before it's too late. Start securing your email privacy with Stackmail. Sign up today and you'll get 50% off your first year. Go to stackmail.com/Ayaan. That's Stackmail with a T, START mail.com/Ayaan for 50% off your first year. Stackmail.com/Ayaan. Now to my conversation with Ian Rowe. Ian, welcome to my podcast. I've really been wanting to talk to you for a long, long time. And finally, we can do it.
Yes. Oh my gosh, Ayaan, I am so thrilled to be talking with you. So we are kindred spirits, I think, on so many fronts. So I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Oh gosh, so am I. And I don't think we have enough time. I mean, I could listen to you for days. And we have to squeeze this into something less than an hour, but I will start. Let me start by asking you about your own background. Like, where did you grow up? And what is it in your family, your school, your neighborhood, your church that made the grown-up, wise Ian that I have before me now?
Oh, wow. Wow. Well, thank you for this. And yes, I'm looking forward to chatting. Yeah, well, for many of us, early experiences were defining, and my parents were my world. My parents, both from the Jamaica, West Indies. You know, my parents were married for 48 years before my dad passed away, and just their incredible stories of meeting in Jamaica, then emigrating to first England, then to the United States on this adventure of a lifetime really shaped me. You know, even from the stories my mom used to share about when they were first dating in Jamaica, my dad would pick her up on horseback in the country, and they'd go for their dates. And just, you know, and then when my dad first left Jamaica to go to England because he wanted to study engineering, and Jamaica was still an English Commonwealth, you know, he left his buds. That was the nickname that they had for each other. And after being in London for a few months, you know, he wrote for her hand in marriage, and he wrote to my parents, my mom at the time, and so there was a big thing, you know, because here she was 19 and she was going to move to England, and the parents said yes, and so she took a boat all by herself at 19 years old to go from Jamaica to England. And this whole idea of life being an adventure and having the right partner, and, you know, a strong faith commitment and a strong marriage, and, you know, all these things, you know, me and my brother, we were so fortunate to have growing up. So you know, virtually everything I've been able to accomplish in my life, and the things that I believe are important to young people and human flourishing, very much always connect back to my parents. And there was one seminal experience I can share if that would be helpful.
Please, that would be very helpful.
Yeah. So when we first moved to the United States, so I was born in London. When my parents were there in England going to school, and my dad he was one of the early Black engineers at IBM. And so he came to the United States. We first lived in Brooklyn, and then we moved on up to Queens, to this little town called Laurelton, Queens. When we first moved, I was still in elementary school, but ultimately, I started junior high school. And Laurelton was a town predominantly Jewish and Italian, predominantly white. It was slowly becoming more racially integrated.
Right.
More Black families were moving in. And unfortunately, that led to different kinds of racial tension, to the point where our junior high school suddenly almost became like the epicenter of a lot of these incidents. And the school board, in their wisdom, decided to solve the problem by opening an annex in Rosedale, Queens, which was another town a couple of miles over, but it was more permanently, predominantly white. And so physically, it was another junior high school in a different part of town. Right. And so all of the white parents in our junior high school decided to take their kids out of our school and send them to the annex.
Yeah.
And my parents, who'd come to the United States to, pursue the American dream, on the assumption that where the white kids go, there must be a better education there. So they were going to transfer me. And I will always remember the Sunday night before my parents had to put in the transfer papers. My dad was in his recliner, my mom was on the sofa, we were in the living room where we had lots of family discussions. But on this night, I begged my parents not to move me. I said, why does my school have to be worse? I love my teachers, I love my schools. Just because everyone that's going to be left is Black doesn't mean, it has to be worse. And my parents would have crawled through broken glass, right, if they thought it meant good things for their two sons. But in this one, it just felt wrong. And I cried and I begged, and they ultimately relented, and they ultimately said, okay, you can stay. And it was weird because, I had never challenged my parents on anything, but on this, it just felt like there was something that I need to stand up for. And when I look back on it now, I wouldn't have described it then, but it is, I think, the first time I tasted this sense of what agency means, where you are able to really fight for something you believe in and help shape your destiny. And I've no doubt that experience helped shape my worldview, that regardless of any institution, its demographic makeup, its racial composition, that it can be exceptional. Doesn't matter. It's not inherently disadvantaged because of the composition of the people that make it. So that experience with my parents, the fact that they gave me that freedom to make or to support that decision, has been transformative for my life.
And so, Ian, was this in the 1980s or 1990s?
So this was, this was late 1970s. I'm a bit older than.
Oh, you're a bit older than me. Okay.
Yeah. So this was when I was in. I was 12 years old, because this was essentially 7th grade. Yeah. In the New York City junior, what we used to call junior high school.
Right.
So it was a very fraught time, especially. There were a number of violent incidents, and people were looking for solutions, and the only solution they seemed to come up with was essentially, let's just separate the races. And
so what was the nature of these racial tensions? I came to the US in 2016, and I don't know, I was under the impression that most of these racial tensions had sort of evaporated. People were more integrated. I was comparing the US to Europe. But, this late 70s, 1980s in New York City, with all of these races thrown together, Jewish, Italian, Jamaican, in this case, African Americans, what exactly was the nature of this tension?
Yeah, there's actually a documentary that has been done on Laurelton because it was so explosive at the time. And like with most things, I don't think it was the majority of the people, but
Mhm.
there were unfortunately there were some members of the predominantly white community thought their community was being encroached upon,
Yeah.
rightfully or wrongfully, but this was a middle class community. There were some pockets of poverty, um, but if you don't have levels of exposure, stereotypes can develop and harden, and a leadership matters a lot, right? Because the school
Yeah.
board could have made a very different decision, right? The school board didn't have to say, let's just open another annex, right? So
Yeah.
that decision almost facilitated
Yeah.
this idea that separation is
It's
the
good.
answer, right? And
Yeah.
so this is why the attitudes of leaders make such a huge difference for how we as a people choose to live or not live together in harmony and peace.
Right. So would you say then, you decide to stay, you convince your parents to let you stay in that school. And at that point, would you say that is predominantly Black?
Oh yeah, no, it was a virtually all Black, let's use the term segregated school.
Segregated school, yeah. And it's
Yeah,
Black at that point. But then you stay there and you finish junior high and, look at your trajectory. So, going to a Black school, the one you describe, at least in your experience, was not necessarily going to lead to a terrible future of,
exactly.
yeah.
Right. That's the point. I mean, oftentimes you hear someone will say today, like for example, New York City, it has the most segregated schools in the country, or segregated schools in certain parts of the South, and there's this assumption
Yeah.
that is inferior, you know, and I fight against that every day. I run schools in the heart of the South Bronx and the Lower East Side of Manhattan that are 99% Black and Hispanic, and that last percent is usually Asian. It's not as if our parents are waiting for a group of white kids to show up to
Right.
suddenly, right, for the school suddenly to be successful. And it's just one of these underlying assumptions that's so corrosive.
Mhm.
There's a great story or great fact. Booker T. Washington, about 100 years ago, a great leader who I often am surprised that more people don't really recognize his approach and ideology. But he was very frustrated with the state of education for Black children during the era of Jim Crow segregation, particularly in the South. I mean, Black kids had access to horrific schools.
Yeah.
And what he fought for was not integration. What he said is, look, we need to improve our schools, the schools that service particularly Black kids. And so he had a vision for building a whole new network of schools exclusively for Black children, which was very interesting. And so he approached Julius Rosenwald, who at the time was the CEO of the Sears Roebuck Company. And together, with the support of local communities, they built a network of nearly 5,000 schools throughout the South. This is during Jim Crow segregation.
Right.
And they were some of the most exceptional schools in the country. And you look at the data, Maya Angelou went to Rosenwald schools. John Lewis went to Rosenwald schools. Amazing, amazing, and demonstrating that separate didn't necessarily mean inferior. And the ironic element of this is that it was the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision, which everyone honors because it was so important. But
Right.
at the heart of that decision was the premise that separate was unequal and inherently inferior, and so thus led to the closure of
Of course.
Rosenwald schools across the country. So imagine that.
Yeah.
Imagine
Yeah.
that, this incredible decision. So anyway, yes, so this fundamental sort of premise that separation of race must mean somehow it is less than, I think is at the heart of so many flawed proposals for how we move forward as
And that
certainly
is,
in the education
yeah.
community.
And this is fascinating. And I listen to you, and this is what I hear. It is not really about the skin color of the kids and separate and separation. It is about the quality of the teachers. It's about the availability of resources. It's about the commitment of the adults to the quality of the education of the children. If you have all of that, it really doesn't matter what the color of the skin of the kids is or how separate.
Well, everything you just said, and I will say there are other elements like the strength of the families that are supporting the children.
We'll get there.
And no, but these things, because I think one of the challenges that we tend to silo these things, and human development isn't just about where you go to school. That's obviously a significant factor, but yeah, these other things matter, and we'll talk about it. But yes, fundamentally, again, I run charter schools, and we deliberately place our schools in communities that are almost, by whatever reason, are not racially diverse, in the sense of, it's not as like you have proportional representation of white kids and Hispanic kids and Asian kids. They're predominantly low income, in at least in the South Bronx, predominantly Black and Hispanic. And it's about the expectations that we set, that you have the ability to forge your own dreams, and we're not expecting you to pull yourself up by the bootstraps. So that's why we are building this great school, and we can talk about the new school that I'm launching later this year. And yes, but we have become so obsessed with skin color, it seems, that becomes almost a disabling prism through which we are looking at schools, looking at opportunity. Like if a certain racial mix is if a school has a certain racial mix, then obviously they're under resourced. They're obviously under something. And I just fight that premise, because I actually think the rhetoric that surrounds that kind of belief system actually contributes, in my view, to low expectations and the very negative results we're all trying to avoid.
Right. No, I hear you, and I really do want to talk about the school or network of schools that you plan to launch. I think you start with one and it becomes a network. But let's move now to the other factors. When I was preparing for this conversation with you, I was looking at George Floyd. It's 2 years since his death. And I thought I will just look at, his biography. What was his childhood like? What schools did he go to? I couldn't find much about his family. But I think it's very important that we articulate the other factors that you talked about, the way you talk about your parents, the way their courtship, their love for one another, the establishment of a marriage, the way they would walk through glass, you said, broken glass, to give you a future. How important is that?
It's for me, it's fundamental, and something we have to be able to do in our country is to simultaneously speak about the ideal situation for children, which in my view is being born and raised in a married 2-parent household, low conflict, lots of love. That's the ideal situation. We have to be able to speak about that, while also acknowledging that there are other structures that exist, whether it be single parenting or other situations. And by focusing on the ideal, that doesn't mean that we're denigrating other structures, but we are saying that we have collective wisdom
Yeah.
around the kinds of environments that really lead to human flourishing for children. And we just can't deny it. We have to be honest. So the reason I run schools is that I want to help young people understand what the ideals are in each of the facets of your life, whether that be in relationships or your course of study, or whether or not to have a faith commitment in your own life. Ultimately, you will have agency. Ultimately, you will be the primary decision maker in your own life. But even if you are from, for example, a family that may have been challenged in some way, it's not intended to make you feel bad or criticize you if we say, well, as you think about your own future, this is what marriage can mean. This is what deep relationships can mean for you. And so, because I think sometimes there seems to be a conflict, or there's a desire to downplay, for example, the benefits of marriage, long, loving marriages, low conflict, because, well, kids are being born into single parenthood situations. So we can't talk about that. You can't impose that worldview on these children. And I just think that's depriving the very people who need to hear it most about what the benefits would be in their own lives.
So, I mean, I know that it's become, it shouldn't be, it's rational. Marriage is the ideal where two people who love one another set up a family and look after their children. But this has become controversial to the point that what you are talking about is not seen as an ideal, but it is seen as stigmatizing single parent households. And in Black communities, when we talk about single parent, really we're talking about single moms.
Yes. Well, one of the things that I try to do when it comes to this topic is I try to actually de-race the issue.
Right.
So in the mid 1960s, it was Daniel Patrick Moynihan who probably put on the radar with his report about the what we call then the Negro family, that he had noticed from his work in the Labor Department that there were these pockets, not all, but that there were these pockets within the Black community that seemed to be entrenched in poverty and dysfunctional behavior. And he did this whole analysis, and he came to the conclusion that there was a deep linkage between the non-marital birth rate and these deleterious outcomes. And at that time, the non-marital birth rate, this was in, I think, 1966, the non-marital birth rate in the Black community was 23.4%. Whereas in the rest of the country is about 5%. And so in the white community was, low single digits.
Right.
And he said, crisis, crisis, crisis. Mm-hmm. This is something we must focus on. There's no community that can have this level of, absent fatherhood, use other language, right, and really create thriving environments for children. Well, fast forward, 56 years, and now
Charles Murray coming apart.
Yes, exactly. Charles Murray, he says, hello, guys, I'm going to write a book called Coming Apart, and I'm not even going to focus on Black people at all. I'm only actually going to focus on white people.
Right.
And I'm going to cover the period from 1960 to 2010 to show you this incredible decline that has happened in the white community. And so now it turns out that the non-marital birth rate in the white community is now nearly 30%, far exceeding the crisis levels that Patrick Moynihan had pointed out in the Black community in the mid-1960s. So I like to make the point that this is what I call an equal opportunity tsunami for all races. And again, by saying this, because it's a fine line, I'm not, again, denigrating, because believe me, I know many, many, many single mothers in our schools who will do anything. They'll crawl through broken glass for their kids too, to be successful. But the data is overwhelming of what the likely outcomes are. And for me, I have a particular interest in young mothers. So women 24 and under. So in 2019, for example, the non-marital birth rate for women 24 and under in 2019 was 71%.
Mm.
It was 91% in the Black community and 61% in the white community for women 24 and under. And because there are more white women overall, there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of more white kids being born into very unstable situations. And about 40% of these births are to women who are having at least their second child. So when you start to put all of this together, you start to see that there are environments for young people across race that are just much less conducive to healthy futures. And we just have to have the ability to talk about these things honestly, without shame or blame, but from the position of how do we help young people make the best decisions for their own lives?
So I can testify from experience. I was in a household. My father left when I was about 10 or 11 years old, and he was gone for that whole decade. So throughout my teenage years, he wasn't at home. So in that case, growing up in a household of a single mother, my brother dropped out of school, my sister dropped out of school. And my takeaway from my life experience is when I grow up and life was miserable. So for me, it was when I grow up, I am not going to have children on my own. And I'll try to avoid as much as I possibly can raising children on my own, because my life was miserable. And so when I talk to other people who grew up, regardless of their race, regardless of their backgrounds, who grew up in single parent homes, single mother households, they all hated it, even though they loved their parent who brought them up. It was hardship. And if we had options, I think we would always take the ideal of the two parents, and especially the presence of the father. So that should not be controversial. It is not controversial with people who experienced that hardship of growing up in a single parent household.
Yes. What's interesting about what you're saying is that there is often a disconnect between the very people that you're describing who grew up in these situations and know that they want an empowering alternative. There's a disconnect between that group of people and then those folks who claim to be advocating for those people. So for example, there is something called the success sequence, which is a title that I think is sometimes triggers people negatively, but it's the data around this series of decisions that basically says if you finish just your high school degree, then get a full-time job of any kind, just so you learn the dignity and discipline of work. And then before that, and then if you have children, if you get married first, the data shows that 97% of millennials avoid poverty. And the vast majority are in the middle class or beyond, right? So it's the kind of information that's just, in some communities, this is known. You don't have to teach it, right? But if you're in a community where the non-marital birth rate, like for example, in the South Bronx and other areas of the country, is like 85, 90%, this might be helpful information that students need to know about. And so we recently did a survey and we found that huge super majority numbers of parents who were single mothers, when asked, would you want this information taught to your children? The answer was, of course we would, right? Because they don't want their kids necessarily they at least want their kids to have more information than they might have had when they were making decisions, right? So that's coming from the community of people who are actually living these experiences. But then come along all these sort of woke,
Yeah.
like, they know what's best because, in this oppressive society. And by the way, many of these people who are woke are doing exactly the things in the success sequence, right? In their own lives.
Yeah.
They are finishing their education, getting work, marriage, then children.
And they have communities, whether they go to church or they go to some other faith community.
Of
they
course.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. No. They're living out. They're leveraging the pillars of society: strong families, religious, strong educational choice, and yet, but when it comes to teaching this kind of content in schools, they are adamantly opposed. No, this is paternalistic. You're going to make kids feel bad. We can't, the real barriers or systemic racism or these other oppressive systems. We can't teach that to children. And so this is the crux of the issue, in my view, that you've got whole groups of people who are striving to achieve the American dream. The last thing they want to hear about in schools, for example, is that, America is this racist nation. Like, they want to know, how is my kid going to be successful? What are the tools, habits, and behaviors? And yet you've got another of the quote unquote elite who are not preaching what they practice in their own lives about how their kids can be successful. And I want to call out the hypocrisy often of those kind of leaders, because they're literally depriving the very young people of the kinds of information that could lead to a flourishing life. There's no guarantee, but understanding the benefits of marriage, strong families, of having a personal religious faith commitment. It's not telling you must be Christian or Buddhist, but understand what that can mean in your life. These are beautiful elements of humanity. And I feel that sometimes we ignore the collective wisdom of what we've all learned about what it means to really lead a flourishing life, and then instead replace it with these sort of technocratic solutions. We need reparations, or we need this government intervention, which are so far away from cultivating humanity. And so anyway, so this obviously is an area I get very passionate about, of what I think young people need to learn, especially the communities that everyone seems to be so concerned about, but they're not actually listening to what these very communities are saying they want and need for their own children.
They're listening instead to organizations and movements, the most current of which is now Black Lives Matter. So the other day during the Easter break, I saw this video of an interview with Patrisse Cullors, who was, I think, a co-founder. I'm Black, I'm listening to her and listening to both women. And I just sense these two people are not in it for the Black people who are suffering. They're in it for themselves. I think they were discussing a 990. They had to file their taxes. And here they're sitting saying, well, I don't know what a 990 is. Well, when I found out, how come these other organizations are not held accountable? They're holding us accountable because they want to snuff out Black organizations. They just immediately move into this narrative of victimhood. But looking at these two women and looking at the issues that they claim to speak for, they claim to speak for the George Floyds of this world, for the young Black men who are in constant contact with the police, in constant contact, getting into trouble all the time, drop out of school, all of these things. And their solution, first of all, their diagnosis of the problem is that the system, the structure that we have in place, the way our society is organized, that is so rigged against them that these communities, Black communities, and especially Black young men, have no choice but to turn out the way they turn out.
Yes.
And their solution to the problem is precisely the opposite of what you were discussing. I went and studied these Black Lives Matter materials, the way they address the grievances and then the solutions they propose. And the one that's most striking is their objective to eliminate the nuclear family. I wanted to take your thoughts on that. I mean, how do you see Black Lives Matter as a movement, as an organization, what they promote? I know it is a culmination of many different intellectual outputs, Black studies in universities, intertwined with postmodernist ideas, communist or socialist. But the outcome is this. They now have a movement, an organization, they have websites, and they have prescription. And what they prescribe, what do you think that is going to lead in terms of changing the outcomes for Black communities, especially in America?
Well, if we were to follow the prescriptions of the organized efforts of Black Lives Matter, it would lead to the further destruction of the Black community. Yeah. And that's what's so frustrating about this entire, experience that we've had, certainly over the last few years, in which that there are many people of all races that recognize that opportunity has not been equally meted out in our country. You can't deny that. I mean, I run schools in the heart of the South Bronx where only 2% of kids are graduating from high school ready for college. But there are a whole bunch of reasons that is happening, and that there are many people who have genuine desire to create more opportunity for all. But when the diagnosis is always, 990s are another example of systemic racism. Well, I know I've run nonprofits. I've got to fill out, I have to complete 990 forms. This isn't some, coordinated effort to expose the donors. This is part of living in a society where transparency is actually a part of the American system. I've written a book called Agency, and it starts with this premise that there are these two meta narratives that young people in particular are dealing with. And you're describing the first one right now, which is what I call the blame the system narrative. And the other is called what I call blame the victim. In the blame the system narrative, it's what Patrisse Cullors is saying, is that America inherently is this oppressive country from its very beginning, that all of the systems around race, class, gender are so rigged against you, you have no power. The only solution can be not only to have these massive government interventions, you actually need to literally destroy the most important institution, which is the nuclear family. In this worldview, a white supremacist is lurking on every corner, or it's a 1619 project that says the founding principles themselves were false when they're written, that anti-Black racism runs in the very DNA of the country. I mean, imagine if you're a 7-year-old kid hearing these things. You don't have agency. You are at the whims of a massive government system who, based on this description, is just designed for your destruction. And that's the blame the system narrative that I find so debilitating. But now, on the other hand, there's also what I call the blame the victim meta-narrative, which is that America's not the problem. America's great. You're the problem. If you're not successful in this country as a young person, then it's because of some pathology that you have. You should have pulled yourself up by the bootstraps, right? There's something that you did wrong. And, so both of these meta-narratives, there's some element of truth, because there's always an element of personal responsibility. There are some structural barriers, but these two meta-narratives are half-truths that add up to a singular lie, because both together rob young people of agency, this idea that they do have the ability to be a master of their own destiny. And I define agency as the force of your free will guided by moral discernment. The force of your free will guided by moral discernment. So think of agency as a vector or velocity, where velocity is not just speed, it's speed and direction. So if each one of us has within us the ability to exercise free will, but if agency is free will plus being morally discerning, how do you build the capacity to be morally discerning? And that's where this concept of free, this framework that I'm putting forth, family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship. If more young people would embrace these four pillars, those are the character and moral shaping institutions that help each of us discover the tools of self-betterment and self-renewal that exist within us and within our community. So F in family, it's not about the family that you're from, it's about the family that you form. So regardless of the conditions of where you have been, if you understand things like the success sequence and you know what is possible, it sounds like in your life, you came to the conclusion that this is, when I get older, I'm going to avoid a situation where I have children outside of marriage. Unfortunately, the data seems to show that most young women in the situation that you're in don't make that call, or they don't have other forces in their lives helping them to make a different decision. That's why you see such a cycle of young single parents. But so that first F in free is about family and helping young people understand the benefits of marriage and strong families, low conflict relationships. R for religion is, again, understanding the power of a personal faith commitment. Doesn't have to be Christianity or Buddhism or Judaism, but more young people, instead of adopting the woke racism, which John McWhorter almost describes as a new religion, actually recognize the benefits of the true religions that have existed for centuries and how that can connect you to larger communities and a way of being, a way of moral existence that will help you in your life. E for education, understanding the power of school choice, importantly, because that really doesn't exist for so many kids across the country. And then the last E of entrepreneurship, which isn't just about building financial wealth, it's about building social wealth, but it's about problem solving, understanding work and benefits there. And so I go into each of these four elements as a new framework, a new way for young people to think about their lives, that there are institutions that can help them be the person that they want to be and can be. And so the blame the victim people need to recognize you can't just expect a 7-year-old in the heart of the South Bronx just to pick themselves up by the bootstraps, right? There are institutions that can help them, and we need to animate those institutions of family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship. But then the blame the system people cannot send this debilitating message that your life is completely dependent on some massive government intervention or massive societal transformation in order for you to be successful. Because when you send that message, you are killing the dreams of young people. You're robbing the very idea of self-determination away from them. And so my hope is that with agency and this free framework, we have a new conversation. We have a new idea of the sense of possibility that young people deserve and have the ability to lead in their own lives.
I think that's brilliant. And I'll say the blame the system people have given us, BLM, Black Lives Matter, an organization that's now about to fall apart because of the hypocrisy, but also because of taking funds from people, well-intentioned people who really trusted them in trying to bring about the kind of change we long for, and that they have betrayed because they have abused those funds and the trust of the people who gave them and the trust of the people in whose name they raised those funds. And I think the alternative that you're giving us is the free framework. And I think it's absolutely brilliant, so much better and much more powerful and much more lasting than this blame the system narrative. I want you to end, please, by talking to us, because you're not just developing an abstract framework, you're also literally establishing the E for education.
Yes.
Please talk to me about these schools, and we'll end with that. I love ending with on a note of optimism that these are problems that we can actually tackle.
Well, that's the thing. What is the empowering alternative? What is the practical solution? And for me, running schools, that the E in free, the first E in free, has to be part of the solution. So I am launching what is a new charter management organization. It's called Vertex Partnership Academies, in which we work with networks, in this case, Public Prep and BRIA, who networks that currently only go through 8th grade, but now have extended through 12th grade. So we can launch a new high school as their high school program, grounded in the ideals of equality of opportunity, individual dignity, and our common humanity. The entire school is organized around those principles and the 4 cardinal virtues of courage, justice, wisdom, and temperance. And we pair that with the International Baccalaureate model, where we will have a school dedicated to these ideas of viewpoint diversity and kids not being treated just as avatars of a label, like, oh, you're a Black kid, so therefore that must mean X. No. You are loved because you are a human person. And it sounds so simple, but in our current society, we have lost the ability to treat each other with the inherent dignity due to each human being. So you pair that with a rigorous curriculum around academics and around mathematics and science and literature, and you have a fantastic school. And in this particular model, we'll have a college pathway, and we'll have a careers pathway, which we can go into more detail. But let me just end on one last point, because I do think it's important to think about the future. One of the chapters in Agency is about this idea that America is a good, if not great, country. And that the distance between good and great is up to us. Right. It's up to we as citizens, we as the next generation, that we have the ability, the tools, the Constitution, the founding principles, and yes, our legacy of slavery and the knowledge of all of the negative things that have happened in our country. But you put all of that together, and then you can be part of what brings this nation to that next level of perfection. And that's, for me, that's the orientation. The blame the victim, blame the system narratives are destructive. Agency and the free framework are constructive and can help shape the picture of what you can achieve in your own life. And you don't have to do it alone. There are these institutions, family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship that can help lead the way. And so I'm just very excited, and thank you for the opportunity to share these ideas.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you ever so much. And I want to say to my audience that if you care deeply about these issues, if you have trusted BLM and given them money and you regret that, and you're looking for a new framework, a new movement, a new organization to donate your money and your time and your trust to, pick up Ian Rowe's new book, Agency, the 4-Point Plan. F for family, R for religion, E for education, and E for entrepreneurship. And I think, Ian, it's due next week.
Yes.
What's the release date of the book?
The exact date is May 16th. That is the release date.
The release date of the book, Agency by Ian Rowe, is on May 16, 2022.
Yes.
Ian, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time. And thank you so much for what you do. You're my hero.
You are my hero. You're my hero.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you for tuning into this episode. As always, if you're enjoying this podcast, consider supporting it at ayaanhirsiali.com. Thank you, and until next time.